And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. In the fall of 2013, under enormous public pressure from the Tahltan people, the news media, and supporters such as David Suzuki, Fortune Minerals declared it was abandoning its exploratory drill sites on the Kaplan Plateau. This was not the first time the Tahltan people stared down industry in their territory. On today's Open Connection, Michael Bourquin shares how he got his start in the television and film industry.
I'm from Iskut, that's where I grew up, Tahltan, and growing up they always said, you know, you're a Bear Laker as well, and so, you know, we do have some ancestry from down here in Gitxsan territory, and part of the Klabano people of the Tahltan and Wolf clan. Yeah, life growing up in Iskut was really good. Thinking back to it, like, you know, as childhood, it was a lot of fun. We had like the entire village to roam around as kids, and in and around the village, up in the bush, playing up out on the bluff. We used to go hang out up there, and it was really nice and quiet. Like, I never thought of this as a career when I was a kid. Had no idea what I wanted to do, and at one point I went to culinary arts, did that for a couple years, and in the end there's a 3-month practicum, and I realized this is not for me. And so I went back home to the res. I was kind of bummed out, but that was in 2005. Yeah, the spring of 2005, that's when Royal Dutch Shell wanted to come into Klabano territory to drill for coal bed methane. And that's when the whole nation kind of came together to stop that. And so there was like a bit of a demonstration in front of the band office in Iskut. Chief and council was there. A document was read out to these Shell reps that came in, and you know, they came in all kind of wide-eyed and freaked out because there was all the Iskut Indians out there in regalia and signs. Kids are waving signs, "Go home Shell," and I had my dad's little camcorder, and he just wanted me to film, so I was filming around. And this filmmaker from Smithers was in town, Monty Bassett, and he was there with his cameraman, documenting everything. And so he was kind of directing me, like, you know, maybe come over here, get this shot and whatnot. And I ended up getting the shot of Chief Louis there, with other band counselors surrounding him, when this document was read to the Shell reps. And at the end of the day, he was like, "You ever consider film school?" I'm like, "No, never." And he suggested Capilano College, now Capilano University, and I checked it out and applied that week. It totally changed how I looked at film and TV, like going from like zero experience. I didn't know what a grip was, or a gaffer, or what a cinematographer actually did, or even editing. And so jumping into film school was just like, wow, it's so crazy. And I learned quite a lot very quickly. And so I did 2 years of film school, and I really got into editing. Like, when you're behind that the computer and you're bringing in all your footage and you can see an actual film come together, it's so cool. It was just like, wow, it's fantastic. And I was always kind of drawn to camera. And so I really love camera operation and shooting. An actor from Heartland, Graham Wardle, he was a student at that time, and there's a good funny clip of him. Yeah, I think I might have that still, I don't know. The program I took was more geared towards like dramatic narrative style filmmaking, and right now I'm just primarily documentary style. And so that was a bit of a leap in between the two, like operating cameras a little different. The editing basics is still the same, you know. In the end, I think maybe the documentary program would have been a better fit for me, but I really enjoy doing documentary stuff, and I see dramatic narrative, it's super cool and interesting, but I'd like to make that step. So I'm just waiting for the right story to come along to make that happen. You're only as good as your last job. I fully believe that, and most of my work just comes from word of mouth. And who you know, you work with one person and they're like, "Oh, I know a guy who could shoot. I know a guy who can edit. This guy can direct." And that's 99% of all my work is just word of mouth. My first solo project was, it's called a Cine. It's on my cousins. I did it on two cousins of mine, Flox and Ishkari from back home. And they are kind of like my language heroes, I guess you can say, because they're super dedicated to learning the Tahltan language. And so I thought that was super cool. They're really interesting characters, you know, growing up with these guys. They're like my best buddies. And so I applied for this grant from the Canada Council for the Arts. And I got a small chunk of money. Looking back at it now, it's incredibly small. And yeah, that was my first project. I submitted to a few festivals, got into a couple. And yeah, that was the first small project. Yeah, it's pretty funny looking back at it now.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Loveman Noel was born September 17, 1913 in Telegraph Creek, the third child of 16 children. Throughout his life, Loveman was known as a provider for his family and sharing his successful hunts with everyone he could. Loveman was passionate about the Tahltan language and culture. Let us return to the conversation as Michael recalls working with his grandfather.
Yeah, I did a Cine, and then my first nationally broadcasted documentary was called CFTK-TV, Our Grandfather's Footprints. And so that was just about my grandfather and like walking the old trails he did. We built a pair of snowshoes, and that's another project with my cousins. But part of that we had to deliver in an indigenous language. And so we had the entire film translated by Angela Dennis, local teacher up in Iskut, and she translated the entire script. And my cousins, Ishkari and Flox, they helped with they were our language coaches, and we spent a week recording every line of dialogue in the Tahltan using multiple speakers. And when that came out, I was super proud of that project because it's the first nationally broadcasted program ever in the Tahltan language. So even to this day, it's like one of my proudest things I've done. But because of that, I was approached by Judy Thompson, and she asked me to do a film on the Tahltan revitalization efforts back home in the territory. And so we put together this, I think it was a 45-minute film, can't remember now, but all on everybody that's involved in language revitalization up in the territory. So I filmed in Dees Lake, a little bit in Telegraph Creek and Iskut, and just showing like language nests and all the people involved and like why is language so important, you know. And so there's lots of great content in there. It turned out to be a really nice little film. Going back to CFTK-TV, everybody was thrilled to hear the language on TV. Like I remember before we were even done editing, like we quickly assembled like the first 10 minutes of the language and put the headphones on my grandma Sarah in her house, cranked the volume right up because it's hard of hearing, and just played her like the first 10 minutes of the film all in the language. And she's like, oh, she loved it, totally understood. So that kind of passed the test. You know, she's nodding, it's true, it's true. And then Grandpa Loveman would say something and she'd just shake her head. And she's like, the language film premiered at the TCG AGM that they have every year. And so we played it for the whole community and got a really good reaction. And at the end of it, they decided to up the budget for the language revitalization program. So I guess that's good. They got a bunch more money to help promote and, you know, keep our language going. First joined the National Inquiry to the MMIWG, I think that was 2017 was the first one in Smithers. And I was hired on as a camera operator. And it kind of blew me away, like being in that space, hearing testimony and stories from all these families, like just right here from the area, you know, it's kind of like I don't know, it's like shocking to hear these stories and then like that they're so close too. And the crazy thing is women are still going missing, are still being murdered. You know, like even during the inquiry when it was still happening. The young lady, was it Jessica Patrick? She went missing during the inquiry, and other women since then. And so, being part of the inquiry was such an incredible experience. Like, it's something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Just hearing all the different testimony across Canada. So, being part of that inquiry, like every city I've been to, you hear the same story over and over again. Like terrible, tragic stories of loss and hurt and pain, and it's just something that'll stick with me forever, you know, like all of these stories, and it's a shame that it's still happening. Like nothing's really changed. You know, the inquiry happened, but Indigenous women and girls are still being murdered and still going missing. You know, like even since then, like a number of women have gone missing just here in the Hazelton area.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. The discovery in May of the remains of 215 Indigenous children, students of Canada's largest residential school, prompted national outrage and calls for further searches of unmarked graves. To this day, there is no full picture of the number of children who have died in residential schools, the circumstances of their deaths, or where they are buried. Let us return to the conversation as Michael shares his thoughts.
Oh, when I first heard about the 215, it just brought back all these memories of shoots I've been on in that school and around the school. Like my first couple years actually working in the industry, went to Kamloops to film at that school. And like being in the dorm rooms is like, it's really creepy walking through those halls, you know, just knowing of the history of residential schools. And later on working on this other series, I think that was 2019, we filmed on the grounds of the school, and then hearing about these 215 like children under the ground, it's just like a punch to the heart, you know. It just, every day I'd think about it, you know, if I'm not like busy doing something, it'll go back to those 215 children and thinking that I was there walking around on these grounds, not knowing that I'm walking over these secret hidden graves, you know. And it's just, it pisses me right off thinking about these. As an Indigenous filmmaker, I feel like it is our responsibility to ensure that these stories do get out there. Not only to be there as a witness to record, you know, like we need to get Indigenous people behind the camera, in front of the camera, just to, you know, get these stories out there, make sure they're told, and to make sure they're heard by the rest of Canada. Because it's almost like Canadians just have blinders on to these stories. Because these stories aren't going anywhere. I think we just have to keep banging Canada over the head with these issues, right? And then hopefully it'll click, and then they realize like the incredible amount of injustice that has been done against Indigenous peoples. Despite all the tragedies and atrocities that Indigenous people have been through, there's always that sense of humor. No matter where I go, I've been to so many different reserves across Canada, and it's like you're just coming home in a way. As soon as you start hanging out, you're just having fun and laughing. Like even going to Aotearoa, you know, I was there for a month on a shoot, and it's just like you're hanging out with your cousins. It's so much fun. Or like the best thing I love is when you're on a crew and it's like all Indigenous crews. It's like, yes, it's just like a bunch of brown faces everywhere. Everybody's just like laughing around, having a good time. And shooting a documentary for her on food trucks around Victoria and Vancouver, and that was a lot of fun. Got to travel around and eat a whole bunch of delicious food from food trucks. Yeah, it was super cool. I've been directing episodes of Moose Meat and Marmalade. I think I started season 3, and now we're on season 6. And so that show too traveled quite a lot. So we spent 3 weeks up in Nunavut, and that same season we went to Spain for like a month, did 6 episodes there. Where else have we been? All over the place. I just got back from, we went to Haida Gwaii, did 2 episodes there. Just came back from Victoria recently, did a couple episodes, but travel quite a bit on that show, and that is awesome show to work on. It's so much fun. Art and Dan are hilarious on camera, hilarious off camera, and I get to work with my my brother Ramsey. He does all the location audio. Yeah, and Stimson, Calvin. I don't know about that guy. Like, if you want to get into the industry, I think film school is an excellent route. It worked for me. Like, I knew nothing about the industry, and those couple years in school really helped. Just gave me a good base of knowledge, like camera operation, editing. Like, I think having that under your belt before even stepping into the biz is super helpful, and it just, you know, can open up so many doors. And one of the biggest things is your fellow students that you're going to school with, because they'll become part of your network. Like, somebody could be like this next big producer, and you're like, hey, I know Buddy Boy. Call him up and then get a good job out of that. Like, any kind of training is super helpful. Or like, if you don't do that route, like, you could jump on a production like as a PA. You know, you might be watching a parking lot for 12 hours a day, but that could open you up into other parts of the industry. Like, it doesn't have to be camera operation or editing, you know, or directing even. If maybe you're good at carpentry, you could build sets on feature films, like down in Vancouver. Like, the industry's blowing up. I know a family down there, they're all in the industry. It's an Indigenous family, and they're just like kicking butt in the industry. And like, he's worked with big name directors and whatnot too, but there's so many facets to the biz. Like, you know, it could be costumes, and it could be, there's so many. It could be grip lighting, you know, so many different options. But for myself, I found that film school was incredibly helpful. Yeah, and if you want to get into the biz, I think going to film school would help for sure. Like, I recently did a 3-week training.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Canadian cinema will be nothing without its Indigenous contributions. Think of the groundbreaking work of Alanis Abomsawin or Zachariah Rocky Krunek's Azurajarant the Fast Runner, considered by those in the Canadian film industry to be the best Canadian film of all time. In this final segment of Open Connection, Michael shares what he is doing to add Indigenous voice to the television and film industry.
We had 8 students from the area, like Haida up from the Nass and like Terrace, and it was so much fun. I didn't realize that I would like teaching so much, you know. But a number of these students are already out there doing stuff. Like this gal from back in Iskut, she's filming now and doing stuff in the language. Like, she was on the language documentary I did, and then now she's filming her own stuff in the language and just like pumping out really excellent content, all in Telten. It's super cool. And then this other student, he's going to film school in the fall, and so I'm really excited about seeing what they're going to come up with in the years to come, because the more brown faces, Indigenous faces we have behind the camera, the better, I think. Adding an Indigenous flair to stories is great, I think. Like, for example, like Taika Waititi, you know, he's from Aotearoa, Maori director, and you can see like he did is it Marvel? I can't keep track of what they are. Yeah, Thor Ragnarok. He did that, and you could see the Indigenous humor coming through in that film, and I thought it was hilarious, you know. And like films like Finding Wilder People, I think it is. Excellent film. You know, like everybody grew up, you know, we all, like, despite if you grew up on the res or not, there's so many good stories to tell out there. Everybody's got some funny cousin, you know, or crazy uncle or whatnot. But the more Indigenous stories we have out there, the better, I think. And we're natural storytellers, you know, because just hanging out around your grandparents and whatnot, the best thing was when they start telling you stories. And like all of those stories, if you could just kind of reimagine them into like a film, you know, or maybe it's a documentary. You know, there's so many stories from back home that I'd love to put to tape, I guess. So for years I was living in Vancouver in the industry, like, you know, just working as hard as I could, trying to pay the crazy rent and whatnot. And then we decided it's time to leave the Lower Mainland, and we moved up here to the Hazelton area. And I think it's one of the best moves we did. Really enjoyed it. And kind of freaked me out because I was so far away from Vancouver and, you know, TV work. But somehow I managed to still survive working in the biz and being flown around the country and whatnot. But I know there's so many good stories here locally too. Like, I'm working on a film with Lorna Brown from Terrace. It's a film on the Highway of Tears, just in the area, like between like Smithers and Rupert. And so that's coming out later this year. Directing more episodes of Moose Meat and Marmalade. I recently DP'd a project for the Knowledge Network that's coming out this fall on BC's history, and that's going to be really good. Oh, there's lots of incredible Indigenous voices in this project, and it's gonna, I don't know, open the eyes of a lot of Canadians, I think. Also, about to nail down a gig for the National Museum of, the American Museum of Natural History. They want a little promo vid for their new Northwest Coast wing. So hopefully I'll get that one. And one cool thing that's happened, my daughter Bibi, she's 10 years old, and she's been, okay, let me backtrack a bit. I also shoot for this show called Coyote Science. It's an APTN kid show. And during the whole lockdown, you know, barely was able to work, but they had me shoot a couple segments up here. And so in my garden, I shot a segment with my daughter Beebs. She's 10 years old, and her friends, and so that'll come out sometime this fall. And then she's a little filmmaker herself. So Bibi's 10 years old, and she became a filmmaker. She does these stop motion Lego like animation just from home, using some of my film lights and whatnot, and her like tons of Legos. But she's like a natural storyteller. She's like crazy good. And so that led to the producers from Coyote Science. They asked me to film a segment of her doing animation. So I shot that, and I'll be editing that soon. It's a really exciting industry. It's tons of fun. It really opened my eyes up to so many issues in the Indigenous communities, and being able to celebrate and share our stories. It's been a highlight for sure in my life, and I look forward to the future and like what so many other stories, you know, that.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.